Hello. I just finished watching I'm Thinking of Ending Things, a new Charlie Kaufman movie that's out on Netflix based on the book by Ian Reid. I am rushing to get this done. In fact, the credits just started rolling on the movie. But I'm rushing to get this review done because if I get it up fast enough, maybe YouTube will deign to let people find it. I'm probably too late, but I'm gonna try anyway. I've written some stuff down. I've written down my thoughts. I have a little review here for you. We're gonna get right to it. One of the first things that I noticed and really liked about the movie is I do like the music. There isn't a ton of score music, at least until the end. It's not John Bryan this time around, although Charlie Kaufman's used him a lot in the past. It's some other guy. I forget your name, sir. I'm sorry. But it was very good. The main theme especially is quite nice, and in particular definitely reminds me of the main theme to Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, because that theme is famous for being really sweet, but also has this undergirding of sort of scary, spooky, or just not well. Things are not well, ultimately. It's sickly sweet. And this main theme, I think, accomplishes a very similar tone, and I appreciate that, and every time it came up, I was happy to hear it. It's some decent cinematography, too. I'm still not sure, in terms of analysis, of why the choice to do 4:3. It tends to be a very particular choice. Of course, A Ghost Story famously went back to 4:3 when that movie came out a few years back. And it tends to be very, I don't know, it's rather than pinning stuff to the distant past, it pins the time period almost to like the 90s, or the 80s and VHS stuff. So I was a bit confused by that, but in general, cinematography's lovely, especially the landscapes in which the movie takes place. What can you do wrong there? It's a lot of farms, it's a lot of bleak landscapes, a lot of snow, so obviously there's a lot to work with there in terms of the visuals, and they do a great job. There's a broken mirror thing, which is a bit cliche at this point for cinematography, but you know what, it's fine. If you saw one of my previous videos, I also read this book a little while back, and I shared my thoughts on that in another video, but in general, I will say that I think basically every aspect of the book was done better here in the movie, and that might be a little shady. I don't know. It also might play into my general subconscious hero worship of Charlie Kaufman, his work. Maybe because his name is on this, I automatically think that he did everything better. But genuinely, I do feel that way. Even in particular, something I noticed early on was that I liked the dialogue better and how it was executed here in the movie version. There were times where in the book the dialogue could get a little, I don't know, annoying, a little bit pedantic, even though it's kind of part of the point. But here, for the most part, it wasn't so annoying, especially towards the beginning of the movie. There are moments later on that feel a little cringy to me, a little try-hard progressive, or in particular there's a long conversation about how the song I'm a Baby It's Cold Outside is actually kind of about rape, isn't it? It's like, whoa, yes, we all had that conversation freshman year of college. Like, we get it. We didn't need the movie it didn't help the characters all that much. But in general, dialogue, I really liked how it was executed, and of course a lot of credit goes to Jessie Buckley, our lead actress here, and Jesse Plemons is the male lead in the movie, and they're very good. They're very good. I was distracted a bit by Jessie Buckley. She's an Irish actress, and you could tell it was slipping through at times, and I didn't know if it was supposed to or if that was part of the character or what. She could have just had an Irish accent, I think, because later in the movie we meet the male lead's parents, and guess what? His dad is played by famous British actress David Thewlis. Thewlis, that guy who was in Harry Potter and starred in Mike Leigh's Naked, which, wow, that movie, huh? He just gets to have this really thick British accent, so why not just let her act in her own voice? In general, I think a lot of the movie strikes that tone of, and we see this visually too, but like the mood you get in when you're staring out a cold car window and seeing stuff passing by, and you get more contemplative. I think that kind of summarizes the tone of the whole movie, maybe excepting the very, very, very end. By the way, there's going to be lots of spoilers. Hopefully I put it in the title, but just so you know, a lot of the movie uses this form of what I'll call quote-unquote smart people conversation, which tends to be, like, at least in this movie, a lot of referencing other smart people works and books you haven't heard of and poetry and all this stuff, and so there's a lot of that, and that was part of what bordered on annoying for me for a lot of the dialogue. Is like, I have run into people who talk this way. I think I've been guilty of talking this way at certain points where, if I want to seem smart, I'll just reference smart stuff. And in fact, I'm going to do some of that in this review, so maybe I shouldn't criticize it so harshly. Another element of the storytelling itself that I really appreciated, and is the sort of surreal compression of time, and in general surreal elements. This certainly has some parallels to to pieces of Synecdoche, New York, Charlie Kaufman's directorial debut, where just little things are off, or when the story needs to move on to the next point, it just goes there. You know, we don't see the transitions to getting somewhere, or just little things that are off that I love. I don't see a lot of surrealism in contemporary movies, certainly not very often, and I think this kind of qualifies, at least those little moments certainly qualify some form of surrealism, and I love it. I love how it contributes to the tone. I love that I get to see it in a movie. I haven't seen a lot of it. I loved it in Synecdoche, New York, and I love it here. This is another similarity to my feelings about the book, where I felt that the parent characters were my favorite part of the book by far, and that's pretty much true again for the movie version. Toni Collette and David Thewlis, they're the parents of the lead male character, and guess what? They're fantastic, and they're hilarious. They're by far the funniest part of the movie. At the same time, that humor never distracts from the tone. It never takes anything away, because it's still weird and off-putting, but it's also believable and just genuinely funny. Oh, they're really good. They're really good in this movie. I know we've already sung the praises of Toni Collette in everything she's ever been in, well, at least since Hereditary, but she's great again here, and I have all the admiration in the world for her and David Thewlis and what they did in this movie. Fantastic. In general, it is a kind of a weird art house movie, right? Which is never a bad thing, at least in my mind. But what makes this particular weirdo art house movie a little bit distinctive is that it's very much rooted in elements of Americana and American domesticity, and that's so nice. It's very rare that I get to see art house stuff that has really strong ties to American culture. It's really nice to see an American art house movie that touches on stuff that I grew up with, and stuff that I'm familiar with, a sense of domesticity that I recognize immediately. I love it. I love it. And among all the references they make, by the way, in the movie to other works of art and other movies, one I wanted to point out is they talk about woman under the influence for quite a while, probably a bit too long. But 20 minutes prior to that in the movie, I had the impression that Toni Collette's performance was a bit inspired by Jenna Rollins' performance in Woman Under the Influence. I just thought that was interesting. I do think through this collection of references that Charlie Kaufman uses, because a lot of them aren't in the book, by the way, I think he is trying to create a tapestry of like stuff that he's trying to reach for in a way, or not necessarily imitate, but he is borrowing from these things. Even if the characters only mention one of these things in passing, the influence in terms of tone and sometimes even content is a lot more substantial. And I think referencing this stuff by name is a way of him pointing to like, you know what, keep this thing in mind though, because it kind of has an influence on this as well. Now, I would like to move on to fancy analysis time. For one, okay, the twist is a big thing, right? The twist is a huge part of the book, and it was actually my biggest problem with the book. Spoilers again, but yeah, the twist is none of these other characters. The story that we're seeing for most of the movie is complete fiction, and it was essentially written by the lead male character. In reality, he's much older now, and he's a janitor, and he failed to really find any romance in his life or friends or anything, and he's very isolated, and so this is what he does, I guess, to cope in a way, or do some wish fulfillment, is like, I'm going to construct a story about a girl who satisfies my every desire, and she's smart like me, and she's kind of just another version of me, and if people saw me with her, they would understand that I am also good. And that stuff in particular, I actually, the twist I kind of have problems with, but even though I do think it was handled better in the movie, I get the impression that this is why Charlie Kaufman kept that twist, or maybe why that twist in the book appealed to him in the first place, is that it ends up being this weird kind of all-clad excuse to do a lot of tropey writerly stuff in the movie. It lets him do whatever he wants, because if someone says, oh, this is a bad way to portray a female character, or this dialogue doesn't seem completely realistic, or whatever some nitpicky thing someone could say about it, he can ultimately say, well, guess what? That makes sense, because the story that we're seeing is in the mind of this one dude. So it's his biases, right? It's not mine. It's his mistakes. It's his skewed view of the world, and it's his weird things that he's saying about life in general. It's not me necessarily. While on the one hand, using this as an excuse to do a lot of stuff that should maybe be avoided in contemporary writing, at least in my mind, in a way it feels a little bit cheap, but it's also kind of brilliant, because it still gets us some interesting stuff. It allows for all the corrections and frustrations, especially the lead character, the younger version of himself in this story, gets frustrated a lot, and he's constantly correcting other characters, basically basically every other character we see is like, no, this, which feels like, okay, yeah, if you're writing something, yeah, that can potentially happen, right? Where you're like, you know what, you're actually mad at yourself, but it might come out and this character isn't coming together the way I wanted them to, or whatever it happens to be. I do that a lot. I've written a thing or two. I understand a little bit of the mindset of writing something and trying to get it right and not being to get it right necessarily. In particular, it reminded me of something that a friend of mine said, where years and years ago I mentioned, like, you know what, I'm worried that all the characters that I write are really just me and they're not distinctive enough to feel like real characters, right? This smart friend of mine said something very nice, and you know, maybe he's just trying to make me feel better, but he said, well, you know what, maybe it's like a screen print, right? Where like you are taking the same base image every time, but there are going to be small variations in each one, and that kind of makes the difference. And I think that's a really good way to summarize the characters in this, because yeah, they're not supposed to be 100% believable fictional characters. They're all supposed to be believable only within the context of being written and imagined by this one dude who's not doing so well mentally. In that way, I think a lot of this can even function as like a deconstruction of bad writing, specifically of like bad writing of a female character. It's kind of a deconstruction of smart people conversation, quote unquote, and especially perhaps a challenge to the idea of the male writer, or really any writer, who wants to prove how smart they are, and they spend their time thinking of situations in which they could prove how smart they are. And I think sometimes that does leak into people's writing. I won't name any names of contemporary authors who feel like they do that sometimes, but that's another great excuse to have that stupid twist, because it allows for this stuff. It allows for the story itself, the main story, to actually be, it's not one-to-one, you know, it's not just Charlie Kaufman saying, oh, these are my thoughts. You know, when you see something written, you kind of assume, oh, this is what the author or the writer or the creator believes about the world, which is another very problematic point of view that I think is becoming more common, but that's a different discussion. So one of my problems with the book was the fact that I didn't really see a literary voice. So like the line by line writing of the book itself didn't feel so fantastic to me and didn't hold me, didn't keep me interested the whole time necessarily. But here, the movie equivalent of that line by line literary voice is everything. It's the cinematography, it's the music, it's the sound design and the performances, and here it works. Here it feels like there is a voice. I don't know whether we attribute that to Charlie Kaufman or just say that Charlie Kaufman brought that out of the book, like he saw it when I didn't. But either way, it's there, and I really, really appreciate that. Overall, I do think we could end up categorizing this as sad boy art. I don't know if the kids are still using that term. Maybe there's a more derogatory term now. But at the same time, it's still a really nice exercise in abnormal American filmmaking. It's something different, and that alone, for me, that's a huge deal. That really does elevate it beyond a lot of other contemporary stuff. That's one of the biggest reasons that I like it. I do like it overall, and I think it's worth a watch. In particular, if you're a person who spends a lot of time in their own head and you're trying to reassure yourself while also like kind of cutting yourself down, and I think there's a lot to relate to here. Whether that's a good or a bad thing is up to you. I guess I'll move on to some final thoughts. I do think it was a bit too long. I know that's a nitpick. It didn't need to be this long. There was some stuff, especially in the end, that I felt didn't really need to be there. Especially some of the stuff in the car was too much. There was too much. I know it's indulgent, and that's the point, which is weird to say because I did enjoy it so much. What else? Yes, I do like the movie. I'll know with time whether I really like it and whether it's something I want to rewatch and all that other stuff. I can't speak to that right now, but in its difference and its unique qualities, it's fantastic. It's more Charlie Kaufman. Is it really that different from all of the rest of Charlie Kaufman's cinematic career? No, not even a little, really. It's basically just more of what he does. But I also can't blame the guy for sticking to his shtick. I can also see a lot of people hating this movie. If you don't like this kind of stuff, and if you don't like people who think they're smart going on and on and on, you need to find a different channel. Well, but also you might hate this movie. The big closing thought for me is that in the end, it really does what all good art does to me, which is just that it inspires me. It doesn't inspire me to do something similar. It just makes me want to make something good. I want to contribute. I think that's really nice, and I think that's a great quality to have in a movie. And maybe if you are some form of artist or whatever, maybe this would inspire you as well. And I really don't have too much else to say right now. I hope I can get this up in good time, and I'm sorry for speaking so quickly. I'm also interested to see what other critics are saying about it. But gosh, I mean, thank thank you for stopping by. This is a very small channel here, but I appreciate every visit and every view, and hopefully I said something of value. And hopefully I can convince you to at least give this one a shot. Even if you hate it, at least it's different, and that needs to be celebrated. Oh, and you know what else? I wanted to mention this very briefly. The subject matter in particular, especially towards the very end, there's a scene that reminded me of this. It reminded me of this excerpt from this very obscure book. I'll show a picture of the passage here. This book is from, what, 2015 or something? I thought it's always funny to see someone talk about something and then years later someone bigger talks about it and gets all the credit. Isn't that just kind of funny? I don't know. Maybe it's just me.